Hello, welcome back to Specialness. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Kim.
And today we're going to delve into something a little different than we've been doing. We're going to get political by trying not to get too political.
Right.
We have spent a lot of time talking about our situation, and then here in the second season kind of catching people up on hopefully things that can lend them some hints, some hacks to get through. But today, we've got some stuff we have to talk about. Most everyone in the community is going to know what I talk about when I just mentioned the name Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Mm-hmm. In recent weeks, he's made some statements specifically about the autism community, which we are a part of, among other communities. But he's recently made some statements about his feelings about autism and what causes it, and that he intends to find the root cause of autism by September.
Right.
So without getting into any other specifics than that, there has definitely been some consternation within our population, within our community, and what we want to do today is sort of try to break that down and lend some credence to some of that, some of those feelings.
Correct.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack here, and in our efforts to not be political, maybe it'll take a little less time. But there's definitely some things that he said that caused typically kind of one of two reactions from people. One being, who does he think he is? There's all this research and all this stuff. And the other being, well, he's speaking truth to what my life is. Because basically what he said...
I'll read what he said.
We're going to...
Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly what he said.
This is what he said. Autism destroys families and children and says autistic children are kids that will never pay taxes, hold a job, play baseball, write a poem, go on a date. Many will never use a toilet unassisted. So, hearing that, as parents of a adult that has autism, but also has many other diagnoses.
Things, yes.
Like you said, Cason doesn't just fit into the autism community. I mean, it's a lot. But hearing that, my takeaway was, how dare he say that? First of all.
Sure.
The word destroy.
That's a strong word.
Is a very strong word. And it's a hurtful word. I think, let's go to the other side of it. I know people, I have friends that their child/adult will never do the things that RFK mentioned.
Sure.
Cason won't do some of those things. He's not going to pay taxes. He's not going to go on a date.
He's probably not going to write a poem.
Probably not write a poem. He's played baseball with Special Olympics and hated every second of it because there were bugs and stuff. But the other side, and we'll get into that this part later, but the other side, like you mentioned, was like, yeah, but our family life is hard, and our child can't use the bathroom by themselves. Our adult needs 24/7 supervision. So just like in every kind of disability, autism, Downs, cerebral palsy, intellectual disability, brain injuries, neurodegenerative, name mental illness, it's a spectrum, right? You're not going to find the same autistic child over here that you're going to find over here. Same goes with everything I just mentioned. And so we're going to get into that. But before we do, you and I had found an article written by a lady who has
her name is Susan Hall. And she is a freelance writer who lives in Michigan. And most of the articles that she writes deal with caring for her child who has a rare seizure disorder.
Who I think now is 25.
Yeah, is in his 20s for sure. Yeah, so he's an adult. He's no longer a child, but she has been she has written numerous articles, and this article in particular, which we still felt was very germane to this discussion, even though it was written back in December, prior to Christmas, certainly prior to, well, it was after the election, but prior to the inauguration, certainly prior to RFK being confirmed as the health secretary. So this is a article she wrote that was published in multiple publications. This is an article she wrote in response to, things that she had heard RFK say and what her concerns were.
And RFK had mentioned these things when he was running for president before he dropped out of the race. So
right, things that he'd been saying over the past year that had come to the public's attention.
Right. So let's read that, and then we can talk about it.
Okay. So, Susan, thank you. Attributed to Susan Hall. Okay. So, among President-elect Trump's unconventional cabinet choices, the potential appointment of one in particular worries me. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. RFK has long espoused anti-vaccine views, and they are promoted by his nonprofit Children's Health Defense. During his presidential campaign, he repeated thoroughly debunked claims that vaccines cause autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. He also caricatured persons with autism as walking around with helmets on, non-toilet trained, nonverbal, stimming, toe walking, hand flapping. With his inaccurate stance that vaccines should be avoided to prevent autism, Kennedy suggests that chancing severe childhood diseases would be preferable to a life like my son's. Diagnosed at the age of 1 with a rare seizure disorder that stalled his cognitive development and later with intellectual disability and autism, my son today is a smart, charming 25-year-old with a great sense of humor. He's exploding with independence and has cultivated passions of his own, lawn mowing and country music, to start with. Years ago, when my son turned 8, his teacher told me there was an active Special Olympics program in our community. He loved basketball, and I quickly signed him up. He made allies, including his taller, gray-haired 60-something teammate, who would expertly pull down a rebound and hand him the ball to make his shot. By the end of the season, the team had a couple of tournaments scheduled. The coach's wife measured my son and presented him with a shiny purple uniform. But at the first tournament game, I learned that what to my family looked like a successful team could be distorted into a different message. We were losing badly. The other team handed the ball back to our 30-year-old point guard who shot, missed. The other team rebounded and handed it back again. This repeated until we scored. Then uncontrolled joy broke out. Pumped fists heavenward, sweaty high fives swatted. And I can relate to that. It is pretty exciting. There's a lot to take in an event like that. Intellectual and developmental disability in all its expressions amid the general chaos of amateur sports. There's limping, shuffling, unruly hairstyles, broken teeth, body odor, poorly fitting glasses, uniforms slipping down or up unintended. Though these aspects may have been perceived as cries for care, medical attention, or grooming, they really told a universal truth. Things break. People sweat. Clothes can be enemies, depending on the functions of bodies and minds. Some of these things will be tended to in time. Others don't need to be fixed. The elderly couple I was sitting next to saw it differently. I was close enough to hear when the man bent toward the woman's ear and said, "We've been so blessed," he said, shaking his head. "All our children and grandchildren are healthy and normal." Many of us with disabled children have heard others count this blessing. Thank you for my health. Translation, thank you for keeping me normal. Thank you for keeping me and my children and grandchildren off of this basketball court today. Thank you for keeping me out of that hospital room, this nursing home. Thank you for anointing me, for choosing me, for blessing me. It's this normal at all costs viewpoint that Kennedy has reinforced with his language and positions about autism. What this view misses is that disabled people can and do lead lives of dignity and self-determination. Real health leadership cannot mean complete avoidance of disability or treating it as a fate worse than a deadly infectious disease. Instead, it means creating a world that supports and accepts those with disease or disability. Our family has been unspeakably enriched by our life with our son. We've delighted in his accomplishments that have been very different from those of his neurotypical sister. And while it's not fair to my son to imbue him with mystical abilities, or ignore that he and his peers, and by extension our family, face very real challenges in a world not fully equipped to accommodate them, we've experienced him as a bearer of joy. In his wonderful book, Far from the Tree, Andrew Solomon explores parents who have had children very different from themselves and, by and large, have found beauty and meaning in parenting their exceptional child. Difference unites us, writes Solomon. To be entirely typical is the rare and lonely state. Americans deserve a health secretary who would embrace these realities and work to improve the lives of all children and citizens. This would not mean blindly accepting all proposed vaccines without question, but rather strengthening the scientifically rigorous clinical testing process that has already worked to vaccinate millions of Americans and end numerous childhood diseases of the past. A strong leader would help return a conspiracy, vulnerable populace to faith in the scientific system. This person would dissuade President-elect Donald Trump from mocking people with disabilities and instead help people like my son find meaningful employment and safe and affordable housing. Pursuing disability inclusion is, in fact, one of the Kennedy family's most important legacies, seen in their work with Special Olympics and other initiatives. Ignoring this legacy to enact a narrow and dangerous Make America Healthy Again agenda would be a shameful move at the expense of a valuable group of Americans, people like my son and his peers. Yes. Now we're going to try not to be political.
Exactly. But I love what she says because it's exactly our life in that sense, in the sense that has our life been easy? No.
No.
Has Cason's life been easy? No. Will it be hard in the future? Yes. Are there so many unknowns? Yes. Has society accepted him? I would say yes and no. Kind of depends.
Well, by and large, I think the response of that couple she was sitting next to at the game is the level to which most people accept people with disabilities, especially mental disabilities, is that, there's pity, there's concern, but ultimately
frustration
and just they're glad that it's not their problem.
100%. And to lump all people that have disabilities, and I know RFK specifically is talking about the autism community, but it's not just the autism community. It's anybody that has a disability. And how has our society done in keeping them safe, keeping anyone with a disability safe, feeling included, feeling accepted, help, how we help them? And I would say across the board, it's been a big fat F across the United States. Because, again, if you and I did not have Cason, we would be like, I would say, majority of Americans, completely oblivious to the struggles of families like ours. And
hopefully not completely, but yes, we would have far less insight.
Yeah. And the struggles, I mean, we can talk a whole bunch about when your child's aggressive, when doctors look at you and say, I don't know. You should institutionalize. And that was a hint way back when that society's not ready for what your child's going to offer. It just give up. The cost, the lack of help, services. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. And to have the health secretary stand up and say, basically, your child's not normal.
Well,
And because of that, I mean, the first words out of his mouth, besides they destroy families, is they're not going to pay taxes.
that's the thing that I think really stood out for me. And I think that that's where, sadly, I think that's where the concern is coming from. I think that the main reason why there aren't why there aren't a lot of programs, and depending on what state you're in, there are more programs than others. But I think the reason why those don't exist in a more plentiful way is because there is some reality to, well, we have to be concerned about the majority of people, and this is not the majority of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think where RFK's, I think what is driving this is that autism is now being described as an epidemic.
And a disease.
And you're starting to hear numbers like it affects 1 in 5 people, or
1 in 31, I think is what
well, 1 in 31 for autism, but 1 in 5 for mental health. And, so there's definitely a mental health crisis. And so now that it's starting to be a higher percentage of the population, there is concern that, well, what are we going to do? Because if it now represents a larger part of the population who votes, are we going to be forced to create programs and direct funds for people that aren't like me or you, but we have to still represent these people that are out there? So there's this, and the very fact that he said pay taxes is the very first thing he said. These are people that will never pay taxes. Then he said, write a poem and play baseball and do things that are more,
go on a date.
Yeah, that are more about the living experience. The fact that he mentioned paying taxes is the very first thing. And, we also live in a society where everybody is sensitive and at the same time telling everyone to stop being so sensitive. So we're selectively sensitive about what we want to be sensitive about. But what it said to me was that essentially, if you can't pay taxes, then you aren't making a contribution. Mm-hmm. That's fairly troubling to hear a leader, what he is supposed to be in that field, making statements like that. If he had not said those words, if he had not said pay taxes, and he had not said the word destroy, I think the reaction to his language would have been far different.
I agree.
If he's mentioning things like they're never going to fall in love or get married or have kids or write a poem or whatever.
But to use the word never,
yeah,
that's.
Well, and that's also
say that.
That's also that mentality of
they're all the same.
Yeah.
One autistic, if you know one autistic, they're all the same.
Well, and the
one
fact that
kid with schizophrenia, they're all the same.
If he's describing a kid or an adult with autism as stimming and walking around on their toes and flapping their hands, I think it demonstrates how little he understands autism. Mm-hmm. And probably to some degree how little he's been around it. Mm-hmm. I can't speak to how much time he has spent around people with autism. I can't speak to why he feels that it is an environmental disease that is caused by things. And it's not, when he's saying environmental, he's not referring to global warming and stuff like that. He's just saying like literally things around us, things in the food and things like that. I'm not going to speak to any of that as to whether or not, I agree with it or whatever. What I am saying is that by making that statement, everyone with a child of autism could relate and be hurt by what was said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was also a faction that says, no, but that's reality.
And yes, that is true.
That is,
it's not
but
that that's not a true statement.
I know a lot of them say, and I mean, I guess I could say that. I could say that some of the things he said are reality, but I would, I can't imagine a circumstance under which I would agree with destroying a family.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Do autistic children walk on their toes? A lot of them do.
Some of them do.
I would say a lot of them do.
Yeah, I mean, but not all of them.
No. Do a lot of them flap their hands and jump and bang their head against walls? Yes. Do a lot of them have massive aggression? Yes. Do a lot of autistic people, are they nonverbal? Yes. But there's also a bunch that can go to college and lead full lives. So that's why it's called a spectrum, right? It is a spectrum disorder. But the word destroy is a very harsh word, because for us, and again, we're talking from our perspective, destroy. Okay, let me back up. I have heard a lot of people in the autism community who are very faithful and say things like, my child was made in the image of God. Disability, non-disability, whatever.
Well, the Bible says that.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So I struggle with comments like that then they say, but he's destroyed or she's destroyed our family. To me, those don't go hand in hand. Because if you look at your situation from a perspective of God made this child the way this child was meant to be, that's not taking away the extreme hardness of it, the fact that you will have to take care of that child, adult, for the rest of their lives and help them go to the bathroom for the rest of their lives and keep them safe from hurting themselves or you. That could all be very true. But if you're going to have the opinion that your child was made perfectly in the image of God in the way he or she was meant to be made, then how can they destroy your family? So, and this again is my opinion on that. And I'm not discounting that it's hard, because you and I live it. We talked endlessly.
It's difficult.
It's extremely hard.
It's frustrating.
And
sure.
Cason, at any moment, can go into a deep psychosis. At any moment, his clausurol can stop working, and we will have a serious issue on our hands. Thankfully, it's holding him.
That hasn't been the case for
but
several
we
years.
keep having to go up on it, and he's on a pretty high dose. And what happens when we max out? You know, we know he would be violent. We know he would be super aggressive. And he's big now, you know, he's 23. And the unknowns of Cason's life. But I would not use the word that he destroyed our family. He's made our life harder than it would be if he was neurotypical, but his life is hard, you know?
It's a very sweeping statement. You know, it seems to make assumptions. The inference is that anybody who has an autistic member in their direct family, their immediate family, has a ruined life.
Right. And not just autism. Again, I don't want to just focus on autism, even though he did. But
that's what he was talking about. But you are right; it applies to all these other things too.
And the article that you just read, that older couple, I'm so glad. I'm so thankful that we are normal and our grandchildren are normal and our children were normal.
And I'm sure that I am positive that that elderly couple did not mean what they said. I understand the sentiment that they were sharing with each other about how they feel about the fact that their kids and grandkids aren't like the kids that were out on the basketball court.
But the perspective, I think, from a lot of people is that I'm so glad I'm not them. I'm so glad I'm not Jeff and Kim.
Sure.
I'm so glad that they have Cason and we don't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want that. The looks we get, the pity we get, and that we get from society, and I've mentioned this multiple times when I've taken him to doctors over the years, and doctors have said to me, like, question what I'm doing and questioning his behavior. And these are medical professionals and nurses. And I think there is such a stigma against people with disabilities.
Well, and I think RFK drove that home, because I think by saying what he said, what we're used to getting, pity, well, as far as things go, pity's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
At least they're saying they feel bad for us, or they wish they could do something for us, even if they never do. At least the sentiment is there. The way that RFK positioned this, he positioned it as, this is a problem that I'm going to solve by September so that this doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
And, people that are dealing with this, their lives are already ruined.
But we're going to fix it.
But we're going to fix it moving forward.
So nobody else's family's ruined.
And it sounds like I will say I have I can say with very strong conviction that I don't believe we're going to learn anything in September that we don't already know.
Right.
And I certainly don't think we're going to do anything to substantially curb the number of autism or other maladies that people have as a result of whatever he finds by September.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the objective is, let's eliminate autism so we don't need programs.
So we don't need
and people whose lives are already destroyed, well, that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
We're dealing with something physiological. This is not something that can easily be solved, and it really shouldn't be dismissed. And
no. And I think, and I keep bringing up the stigma of society, but I truly feel, and I think we've seen it firsthand, comments of like, we don't have a special needs child, so why should we be concerned? I want the schools to be a certain way because my child doesn't need that. So we live in a society that's an extremely selfish society, and we think about our own personal needs. We do not think about what might be good for somebody else. It's all about us. Our needs.
Yes, generally
my family's needs.
Generally, when people are voting, it's very often, how will this affect my family?
And not the bigger picture. So why can't we have leaders who instead say autism / all disabilities destroys families? Why can't we have leaders that say, you know what? There is a huge population of people in the United States that have all kinds of disabilities. What are we doing to include them in our society?
Well, now you're getting into something we obviously know. Again, I am merely stating a fact.
Right.
Under this new administration, the words diversity, equity, and inclusion are heavily scrutinized words. And they appear to mean different things to different people. But the reality is the disabled community is not the majority of people. Therefore, diversity includes them. Equity is about fairness, and there aren't a lot of programs to even the scale for disabled people. And inclusion is, even if only you look at it socially, we have talked about our feelings of, exclusion, bordering on ostracism for the way our family is. The reality is what you're asking for is right now a very tenable situation as far as if those things are going to come to pass. And right now, I'm not sure that we're going to be hearing a lot of that in the next few years, and how that is going to affect all communities, which, by the way, include all races, creeds, religions, faiths. I mean, I think the one thing we can say is that special needs is completely diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Because it doesn't distinguish the color of your skin or your social status. It affects you, and what happens. So it's no different than cancer. And how that is going to be addressed in the near future versus how it has been addressed, which I'm not even saying it's been, has it been good enough up to this point? I don't think I can say that that's true, especially if you're depending on what state you're talking about. Right. But, is it going to improve from where it has been, or is it going to be questioned as a strictly financial decision?
So why can't, back to the question of, instead of having leaders that are saying the word destroy families, why can't we have leaders that say, what can we do to help these families? Because some of these families, these children, it takes 24/7 care. And it's going to cost them everything financially. Others aren't to that level of severity. However, both parents work, and there's not a lot of summer camps for autistic children. So,
well, the reality is summer camps for autistic children have generally been set up by people who have autistic children.
Right. But where's the help? Where's the concern for families like ours in thousands of other families? There is a lack of concern unless you have a child with special needs. Everything else seems to be just like, yeah, but it's not our problem. And like you said, let's don't talk about it, and let's don't. And we live in a state where we are of all the states, we're pretty much close to the very bottom of services and help for families with special needs. The wait list right now to be on any kind of waiver is between 20 and 25 years. Do you know how ridiculous that is?
Well, considering that there are some people who won't live long enough to get the waiver. Right. It is ridiculous. Yes.
We've been trying to get Cason's Social Security and was denied once. And this is somebody that functions as about a 7-year-old that our state government is saying can have a job and support himself and pay taxes. This is not a fraudulent case with Cason. But we are being told pretty much that you and I are trying to scam the system. That's basically the what they're coming to by constantly denying Cason services.
Those are some strong words. I mean, I think it's more. I'm not going to dismiss that, but I think it's more likely that
they don't want to pay.
They just don't want to pay. I
why
think
don't they want to pay?
They're looking for every reason why they shouldn't have to support somebody.
Exactly.
Because the goal is everyone should be able to contribute and pay taxes. And again, we have talked about, it's not like the benefit, the SSI benefit is it's
like
a lot
$900
of money. At most, it's a little over $900 a month. At most, it's a little over $10,000 a year. At most, it's well below the poverty line.
And for him to get, the reason we're wanting to do this is because, God forbid, something happened to you and me. That $900 would come in handy for
But more
Cason's
importantly,
care. But more importantly, he would have Medicaid. He would have access to medical care. Now, that's a whole nother conversation.
it's a whole other conversation that's being
Considering
talked about right
most
now.
doctors in the state of Texas, not most, I'm saying there's a whole group that don't accept Medicaid. So that means Cason's guardian, who is my sister and her husband, the burden would be passed on to them without Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
And the rules and everything regarding Social Security, and if he doesn't have Social Security and if we sign him up for Medicaid, it's like a 2-year wait. I mean, it's this huge thing. And my whole question goes back to what I started this podcast about. Why do we have leaders that are standing up saying the word, these people destroy families? And how about they stand up and say, you know what? It's not their fault. What can we do to help support these families and these kids?
I mean, you're opening a very broad discussion by asking that question. You know, the reality is I don't know that I have an answer as to why we don't have leaders who think that way. I think given the time we're in, there are leaders who think more that way and leaders who think less that way.
But we live in a state that keeps getting the special education, just keeps getting cut.
Yeah.
And then you have special ed rooms with no aides, or you have a lot of kids.
God forbid abusive teachers.
It's just really, really sad.
It is.
It's a topic of conversation that a lot of people don't want to talk about, because again, if you don't have a child in this realm, it doesn't bother you. It doesn't affect you, because you can go to any public school you want to. You can move your family, register your kid, and go on to school like everything's fine. But when you have a special needs child, that's not the case.
But they would argue that it is. They would argue that nothing prevents you. You have all the same freedoms. You can do all the same things. There's nobody says you can't enroll at a public school,
Right.
and
But that goes
there
back-
are programs there. All the statements are true.
But that goes back to perspective and the stigma
Right.
of what we're talking
Right.
about.
The statement of that public school has a program is a true statement.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a acceptable program or not is certainly subjective, and I think if it was scrutinized, it would be determined that it is below standards.
Or in our situation, it was a joke. Even though it was an incredible school district, it is an incredible school district, and it's a great school for, I mean, I know their special ed department. However, Cason would have, remember, I think I mentioned 30 minutes a week of social skills. That's what they were going to give them, and they labeled them emotionally disturbed
Right.
at age 5.
Right. Which that automatically creates a stigma that's already he's set up to fail.
He was set up to fail. It would have been an absolute nightmare. And because of what we knew was going to happen with Cason and the psychosis and the bipolar and the aggression, he would have been one of these kids. We've been told by multiple doctors, he would have been one of these kids that would have ended up on the news because some special ed teacher or aide would have abused him in some way. He would have been put in a room, in a closet, door shut, and been like, dude, I can't deal with this kid. He's throwing chairs. He's wanting to hit me. And unfortunately, that's the reality for a lot of kids with autism and mental illness.
And unfortunately, by you saying that, we are now, as people watch or listen to this, you're going to get two responses to what you just said, which is the one you hope for is, yeah, we should be doing more. And the other is, that's all the more reason to not, let's not have programs. Let's not have guardrails. Let's let them make a mistake that is unrecoverable, and then we can throw them in a mental hospital and never worry about them again. So again, I think that the struggle here is, are we as a society going to permit a pervasive thought that says, again, I'm just going by what RFK Jr. said, if you can't pay taxes because of some physical or mental reason, then you are not making a contribution to society. Is that Is that the mentality we want to have about our citizens? Because if it is, that is a slippery slope that can very quickly, history tells us that goes down a slope that ends up in a very dark place.
Right.
If we are dealing with a society, a section of society that is incapable of helping themselves to a certain degree, does require assistance, whether that's emotional, physical, assistance on a job,
Independent living,
independent living,
those like Cason who can't ever live by themselves.
If we're going to have a percentage of the society that is that way, are we going to just pretend it's not there? Or are we going to, like we talk about families, like we have talked about families who find themselves in this situation, the families who get destroyed because one of the two people can't handle it.
Yep.
And they leave because it's easier to not deal with it than it is to deal with it. And they would probably argue their lives were destroyed until they left because they wanted a better lives for themselves. And I'm not judging those people for doing it, but a family was destroyed. Even if the two people end up being happy apart from each other, it's still a broken family.
But I would also say that families are destroyed from the financial burden of it.
Of course.
I think we've talked about Cason's day program costs us $3,000 a month because he doesn't have any state waivers, because he actually got kicked off when he was like 10 on accident. So what are our choices living in the state of Texas? Pay out of pocket for this day program, which, by the way, there's barely any day programs in the state of Texas. There's a really big one down in Houston. I want to say, last I checked, I want to say that's $80,000+ a year. There's a residential type place in probably not that far from here, private pay only. They don't take any waivers. I want to say that's $80,000+. That's a lot of money.
Very few people
can afford.
I mean, very few people can afford something like that. Very few people that in our circumstances who have already, taken a financial beating certainly can't afford that.
Because that doesn't stop the fact you still have to pay for medicines that insurance doesn't cover and therapies. That just because you're an adult doesn't stop.
I mean, honestly, in Texas, probably the best financial decision you can make is to,
move out of state.
The whole
thing is messed up. And again, until you live it, you don't understand it and you don't see it. But
so I think that the point of this episode has really, we don't have answers. This is not about having answers. It's really more about questions that are ambiguous and open for conversation. I think what we want to express is, for those of you out there that were hurt by the words destroyed, we're with you. We understand how you feel and the gamut of emotions that you have felt are understandable and you have a right to them. And to the people who have said, well, hey, he spoke my truth and thinking about you as well. The reality is we're in a situation where unfortunately we aren't going to be able to just sit back and hope everything turns out okay. We're going to have to be active in the way that we're approaching care as best we can. With what's happened to the Social Security Administration, I know it's a lot harder to get through to them and talk to them.
And I see it every day in a special needs group of North Texas. Every single day, somebody says, I just got this letter. And my daughter, the one yesterday, my daughter has been on Social Security, Medicaid for 7 years. And this is the mom who cares for the daughter, and said she's been getting $900 whatever dollars a month, and it says starting May 25th she will be getting $0 and her Medicaid has been cut. And the mom's like, what do I do? Why? And so again, I'm going to keep saying it, until you live this life, you have no idea. And it's so easy to say, not my problem. Not my problem. And there was a lady in one of my autism groups. She had written a little poem, but this is kind of the end of it, and I liked what she said, and it's talking about society in general. Quote, I support you, but not with my taxes. I encourage you, but to do it yourself. You belong here, just not next to me. They say every child matters, but some children are left scribbled in the margins, doodles of a potential on torn paper. They slap, quote, inclusion on pamphlets like it's a Band-Aid on a broken dam, but we drown anyway. And I think that's a perfect description. There's a lot of talk about, oh, let's help the special needs community, and oh, we're not going to cut Social Security and Medicaid, and oh, whatever. But in reality, and in our life and in hundreds of thousands of other families' lives, the lack of resources, the lack of help, the lack of society caring, the lack of people, like we talked for years, if Cason had a cancer diagnosis when he was 5 and was diagnosed with bipolar, but if it was a cancer diagnosis, we would have had people lined up at our house to help us take care of Jackson, in bringing us casseroles and GoFundMe accounts and all kinds of stuff, because, oh my gosh, God forbid you have a child with cancer, which is a horrible thing. I'm not discounting that. But when you have a child with severe disabilities, really any disability, you don't get that.
Well, I think that goes back to the whole, the whole difference between cancer and mental illness is you either get better or you don't with cancer. With mental illness or, disabilities, they don't get better. It's just, it's chronic. You want to use that word? I mean, the reality is you can set up a GoFundMe to help somebody for a short period of time and you can feel good about it. And if they get better, you feel even better about it. You set up a GoFundMe for someone who's got a child with special needs.
It didn't.
How long am I supposed to do this?
Right. It doesn't end. And the whole goal of our, not to just today's podcast, but in general, this podcast was to help other families like ours, not feel alone and to feel supported. But I also think we need to be a voice to those that don't have special needs children, that have no idea what it's like on a day-to-day basis, and the burdens and the fact that there isn't a lot of help for our kids / adults. And it's a very isolating way to live. But Cason, at the same time, we've mentioned multiple times in different episodes that even the fact that it has been very hard, and he is very hard, he has brought us a lot of joy. He has taught us things that we would have never known. Our faith, we can honestly say, is 1,000 times stronger than if we did not have a child with special needs. We appreciate the small stuff, like the lady who wrote the article said, when her son's team scored and all the high fives, and that's exactly true. I mean, you watch Cason's Special Olympics team, and it is like that. I mean, you've got people's goggles half on, and they're pulling their underwear out of their butt, or they're pulling their shorts down. And I mean, it's funny to watch, but they love it. And the joy on their face when they score, and how somebody falls down, everyone, the other team, they come over and pick them up and hug. And it is something that it's beautiful to watch. And we get to watch, I guess, Cason, we kind of see God through Cason's eyes, in the sense that, you know, he's so innocent and doesn't know anything negative and bad about people, and doesn't have judgments and stuff. And he's just got this innocence about him. So there's a whole aspect to parenting special needs that brings us joy, doesn't destroy. It's hard, but it brings us joy, and it has made us better people. It has made Jackson a better person. It's made our family better people because of Cason. And we've said multiple times, we would never wish our experience on anybody else. But we also feel blessed because Cason has brought us a lot of things that we would have never experienced if he was neurotypical.
Yeah.
And we want society to see how beautiful Cason is, and his peers, and all the hipsters at My Possibility, and all the kids he went to school with at St. Timothy, and all of our friends' kids that have kids with multiple different disabilities. We want society to see that too, and that they're not just different or weird or having a bad day behaviorally, and it's not a parental thing, you know. So this podcast is to give hope to others, but it's also to show the world that this population should be looked at with dignity and loved like you would any other person. And we just want to continue that conversation.
Well, I have a feeling we're going to get to have this conversation again.
Probably.
But, you know, certainly look forward to hearing from anybody who feels the same or differently about this. Because I have a feeling there's going to be other things said.
Yeah. And again, this is coming from our perspective, and we know that everybody's family with special needs is different and has different needs and has different opinions, and that is 100% okay. This is coming from our perspective and what we have seen and what we have experienced over the last 23 years. That doesn't mean somebody else has a completely different experience. We, unfortunately, have had a lot of negative situations where Cason has been judged. We've been judged. Like I just mentioned, we don't get financial resources at all. We pay for everything out of our pocket, which is a burden on you. I mean, so it's all about perspective. It's about your individual situation. And we'll go from there. But I did want to kind of end on giving a quick Cason update.
Yes.
Because we'd mentioned a couple episodes ago that he was going to have a stress test, cardiac stress test. And we got the results a couple weeks ago, but we had been given a message from the nurse.
Yeah, this is awesome.
That a couple weeks ago, that Cason's cardiologist would be calling him after she talks to, or calling me after she talks to the cardiologist who read his report. So we needed to wait to hear from his doctor, which to me, if in the past when things have been normal or look good, it's always been come through on the my chart and the nurse says, Dr. S says this looks fine or whatever. But the fact that she was going to call us, you know, caused us some concern. And I had to reach out multiple different times, and she had been playing phone tag with this other cardiologist. And so finally heard back from her this last, I think Tuesday or Monday night. And as per usual with Cason, they have no idea that the test was abnormal, but they don't understand really what's going on, or even if it's his heart. So
they're not sure if it's pulmonary or cardiac.
Or is it both?
Yeah, or is it the way they work together?
Right.
So it's one of three things.
Right. So we are, once again, we've done this, I think, 3 other times, but we're going to have him have a heart monitor that he's going to wear for 2 weeks. And then we need to recreate his chest pain, which means we have to get him exercising to recreate the pain.
He's very excited about it.
Yeah. He hates wearing this heart monitor. He stresses about it. It causes him so much angst because he's so afraid it's going to fall off. And and he doesn't like the feeling of it. So it's going to be a long 2 weeks. And then we need to see, he needs to see a pulmonologist to kind of figure out what's going on.
To get their opinion.
On what's going on. But this is typical for Cason. He has symptoms, he has issues, certain things show up as abnormal or whatever, and the doctors go, I don't know.
Just another way he is destroying our lives.
That's right. He's just destroying our lives. So
just destruction.
That's right. So that's kind of the Cason update. And we'll
go from there.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted on that. Let's see what happens in the next week. We may be revisiting this again, but we'll see you next time on Specialness. Until then, I'm Jeff.
And I'm Kim.
And thanks for joining us.